what that is what I'm going to speak on. To believe is to be vulnerable, and the side heading is the disadvantages in the inverted commas of being a believer. By way of introducing, I would like to reflect with you on the vulnerable dimensions of the life of a believer. So it actually amounts to realizing the price that a believer has to pay for holding fast to his or her faith. Now, obviously, it is not always easy to objectively distinguish between genuine faith and a fundamentalist zeal. No, people are willing to die for their faith, sometimes even kill others, etc. We call it a zeal, no, fundamentalist zeal. So sometimes it is very difficult to distinguish between what is true faith, genuine faith, and what is merely a fundamentalist type of a zeal. Or sometimes it is not so easy to distinguish between worship of true God and worship of some of our own self interests. They are so intermingled at times, difficult to distinguish. And therefore, the reflections that I'm going to offer in this some time given to me will leave out these type of problematic issues. I will not go into them. I take for granted that our faith is genuine, and I take off from there. Uh, I shall also point out ways in which the faith related vulnerability itself can be the real strength. I shall point out that. I shall come to that a little later. I have some, no, say about 11 to 12 brief points to reflect upon regarding the vulnerability that a faith commitment creates in the life of a believer. The first, we all know, we are all priests and we have all studied theology, etc. We know that faith has two dimensions. One is our beliefs, you know, what we believe, what we profess. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, etc. These are all called our beliefs. In Latin, we call it fides quae. I believe that something. All those are beliefs. Then faith has got another dimension. What in Latin we call it fides qua, which means believing in. Simply put, it is a state of being committed to something or someone, to a person. So believing in and believing that. And now, uh, one cannot arrive at faith through a strictly rational process. No, we cannot reason out and have some faith. So it is only by entering into a relationship or a faith commitment can we find reasons to believe. So a commitment is first, experience is first, and there perhaps we find the so-called reasons to believe based on our commitment and experience. Now, this involves a personal faith leap, I would say, which is based on experience, and that leap, that jump almost into the darkness, so to say, almost into the unknown, that leap involves a risk and a sense of vulnerability. This is the first type of vulnerability we have in faith life. Perhaps as one grows in faith, such vulnerability may or may not remain at the conscious level. No? But on occasions, especially occasions of distress, one can become aware of that vulnerability. Hence, the faith of a believer sometimes may be challenged by some of these factors. What are they? For example, let us say a scientific discovery or a certain scientific worldview can challenge the faith of a believer. Or let us say innocent suffering can challenge someone's faith. Why should an innocent person suffer? People ask at times. Where is God? So therefore, innocent suffering can challenge sometimes our faith leap. Or enormity of evil in the world can at times challenge our faith. Or sometimes unanswered prayers of the distressed. All these can at times challenge our faith and bring that vulnerability to our consciousness. Therefore, a sustained fidelity to one's faith commitment in the face of such challenges can make a believer truly vulnerable. So, one can then wonder, I believe in God, but my situation does not improve. What am I to do? Or, after all, it is a faith leap that I have made. Is it really worth? So, this type of situation, this type of questions can bring this vulnerability related to our faith to our consciousness. The second point, we have what is called, I put it this way, the wise fool and the foolish wise. Now, what exactly I mean by this? Now, the vulnerability involved in one's faith commitment also emerges from a paradox that such commitment gives rise to. The paradox is this: paradox is the wise are shown to be fools, and fools are sometimes shown to be wise. And at times, it could make no normal sense to risk so much for something that is not visible, something which is not tangible, which is the content of our faith. Now, one who still goes for it thus becomes a fool in the sight of those who do not believe in taking such risks. And yet, the so-called wise, the wise that make only such choices in life that ensure immediate and visible returns, profits, rewards, etc., or those who want to make life in this world safe and secure by all means, are at times shown to be fools. We have this famous example in Luke chapter 12. The man whose field produced so much of harvest, and he said, "What shall I do? I'll pull down my barns, the old barns, and put all these things there and build up new barns, etc. And I will enjoy." And then it is said that very night he was told, "Your soul is required." So, a rich fool, we say. So those who feel secure because of their wealth or talents or capacities or power, etc., are at times shown to be fools because of their failure to distinguish between the things that are temporary and things that last. Now, those, though the wise fools may stand to gain ultimately, wise fools are those that they realize the temporariness of anything that this world values, etc. Those are called wise fools, and may stand to gain ultimately. Yet, in the immediate present, they are vulnerable to loss, mockery, criticism, and even persecution. So, this is a second type of vulnerability that a man of faith, a woman of faith, has to face sometime or the other. A third point of vulnerability is the paradox of vulnerability and witness. What is it? Precisely because of the faith related vulnerability, a faith based on true faith, a life based on true faith becomes a living witness to the gospel. Now, Cardinal Suhard, who was the Archbishop of Paris during the Nazi occupation during the Second World War, he once said, life of faith, he described it as living in such a way that one's whole life would be inexplicable if God did not exist. It's a famous quote. Now, coming to our own times, in the recent times, after the martyrdom of 6 Jesuits and their housekeeper and her daughter in El Salvador in 1980, all of us are aware that 6 university Jesuits were murdered there by the government forces in El Salvador, etc. Now, referring to that event, a simple illiterate woman, having grasped the meaning of that event, seems to have said, "Do not mourn their deaths. Do not feel sad for their deaths. Rather, imitate their lives." This is what seems to have said. Now, the murdered martyrs became imitable heroes precisely in their very vulnerability. Indeed, faith devoid of all risk and vulnerability cannot bear witness to the gospel. A fourth point of vulnerability is faith is the invitation to believe in the strength of weakness. I repeat, faith is the invitation to believe in the strength of weakness. I quote Edmund Clowney, says, "Deep in the structure of God's redemptive plan," he says, "is the principle that his power is made perfect in weakness." Now, in the Bible, this paradoxical principle is exhibited in the life of some personalities, such as we have Prophet Jeremiah or Paul himself or Mary, or even in Christ himself. They're in their very vulnerability, in their very weakness, God's strength shines forth. Now, though Paul was chosen to be God's instrument, he confesses to the Corinthians that he is still being harassed by Satan's messenger. 2 Corinthians 12:7, etc. He says that. He also finds strength in the weakness induced by insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities, and perhaps by his own spiritual weakness as such. All that we have in 2 Corinthians 12:10, etc. He says, in all these weaknesses, he finds Christ's strength shining forth. So, in the midst of his own vulnerability to attacks from evil forces, both outside and inside of himself, he finds strength in weakness and even boasts about it. That the power of Christ may shine forth from his life to give witness to his Lord, etc. That God was making his strength perfect in Paul's weakness became very clear to him when he observed that God was making his own wisdom perfect in the foolishness of the cross, and God's own power perfect in the powerlessness of the cross. All those texts we have in Pauline letters, etc. So, indeed, bearing witness in our weakness and vulnerability makes us credible witnesses. A challenge to the fundamentalist force today. I'm just reasoning out with you. You just look in our own country. Let us say we are a tiny minority. Maybe this fundamentalist forces, you know whom I'm referring to, so much they are planning, so much strategies they are planning day in and day out, etc., etc. They must be wondering, heart of hearts, what makes this tiny minority so courageous, despite all our plans to destroy them. Certainly, at some time or the other, they must be wondering that this tiny minority, in spite of our plans, they are blissfully carrying on their mission, etc. How is that they can still do it? And this is what I call a certain witnessing in our very vulnerability. Witnessing in our very vulnerability. A fifth point of vulnerability is that we need to be suspicious of a faith that is devoid of all vulnerability. If any day, at any point, we discover that our faith commitment has no vulnerability at all, it does not make us anyway vulnerable, I think we need to be suspicious of the authenticity of such a faith. Now, why do I say this? Now, the efforts towards not to be vulnerable are instinctual in all human beings. No one likes to be vulnerable. No, we would like to be safe. We would like to be protected, well protected. No, we would like to feel secure, etc. Now, that explains our almost instinctual seeking for power and wealth, influence, physical, and other types of security, etc. But true faith makes the opposite types of choices. And we need to reflect on this. Instinctually, we seek security. Instinctually, we seek strength and power because we would like to be secure. We would like to be, we wouldn't like to feel insecure all the time, etc. That is instinctual. And yet, our faith commitment demands the opposite type of choices. Now, only those who have deeply contemplated on God's vulnerability on the cross can find meaning in embracing a faith that demands a similar vulnerability in their own faith. Now, Paul understood it very well. Therefore, he could boldly say, "For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." 1 Corinthians 2, chapter 2, verse 2. Now, and again, he would say, "But we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God." Now, what would it mean to proclaim Christ and him crucified in our mission today is an important question that all of us need to reflect upon. What type of a Christ do we actually represent today? What type of a Christ? What is our attitude towards powerful people of our times? Is there a sense of admiration towards them or a desperate attempt to get patronized by them or a critical respect? Do we have a critical respect towards them? In what ways does our faith commitment pinch us in any way at all today? Is a question that we need to, each one has to confront. So, in what ways do we live in the vulnerability of our faith? Is an important question that we need to reflect upon. Does our faith cost anything at all? In what way it makes us vulnerable today? A sixth point of vulnerability, I will put it this way, the vulnerability of falling short of practicing what one professes. Okay? Now, let us say, supposing there is a person who says, I don't belong to any faith. I don't believe in any moral values. Supposing a person says like that, then such a person can have a, have a luxury of being free from all constraints, including any potential criticism against the gap between his or her profession and practice. Because he or she says, I don't believe in anything. I don't believe in any sort of ethics or any faith. So therefore, there is no question of gap between what he professes and what he practices. So he, in a way, in that sense, he has a luxury of living freely. Now, this is not the case with one who professes faith. If you are professing faith and you are professing a certain moral or ethical principles, then certainly we know there always is a gap between what we profess and what we practice. In all our lives, we must accept it. There will be a gap. Sometimes it is a bigger gap, sometimes it is a narrower gap, but there is a gap between what we profess and what we practice. Now, that gap as such makes us vulnerable. Now, one of the things that we have in these days, priests or religious, whoever it is, caught up in certain scandals, etc. Now, why those scandals become a sensation? No, why does it become sensation? An ordinary person commits the same crimes, let us say, it doesn't become a sensation. So those who are in the pedestal, etc., priests, religious, etc., I mean, they are involved in certain scandals, etc., it becomes a sensation. Precisely because of this gap. You profess a set of values, you profess a particular faith and ethical principles, but your life does not reflect it. Now, that gap, because of that gap, that it makes us vulnerable and vulnerable to criticism. So this is the another point of vulnerability that we experience because of our faith. Now, therefore, the luxury of freedom claimed by, but at the same time, the luxury of freedom claimed by the non-professing, on the other hand, could lead him or her to a greater slavery to internal as well as external forces. So one who says, I don't believe in anything, I have no ethical principles, I am free, whether it is really a freedom. So that person may be simply a slave of his or her instincts. However, a man of faith, a person of faith, has to always face this vulnerability, vulnerable to criticism because of a gap between profession and practice. A seventh point of vulnerability is creation and incarnation show God's own vulnerability. Perhaps we will never grasp this mystery. God choosing to be vulnerable rather than a powerful despot, a powerful king, even for defeating the might of the evil. God himself makes his own self vulnerable in incarnation. Now, in addition, there seems to be a more fundamental vulnerability on the part of God exhibited in creating the human being. Why do I say this? Because God has created us free, rational beings, etc. God himself stands vulnerable for being rejected by us. God cannot force himself on us. God cannot force anything, demand anything forcefully from us. God can only invite us. Because of our free will, we can even deny God. And therefore, God stands vulnerable before his own creature, a creature that bears God's own image and likeness. Therefore, God's own faith in us is not devoid of this vulnerability. An eighth point of vulnerability is a vulnerability of being socially responsible. What do I mean by this? Faith entails a responsibility. Faith includes a responsibility for being socially concerned. We know this. You're all Jesuits, we know that from GC 32 onwards, faith and justice issues have been clubbed together. They are not, they are two dimensions of the same reality. We all know this. So therefore, faith entails a responsibility for being socially concerned. Now, what does that mean? Since God is love, we say in first letter of John, chapter 4, say God is love. That is how God is defined. God is love. The one who does not love does not know God. Now, such a responsibility, therefore, could even curtail one's freedom. That is, a needy person has a claim on me, my possessions, my time, my talents, etc. Since the greatest of the commandments has to do with love, demands of faith become demands of love. Demands of faith become demands of love. And we have in 1 Corinthians 8, 1 to 13, it gives us a very good example in this respect. So Paul says that though one is convinced that it is perfectly all right to eat meat offered to the idols, he says, yet out of the concern for the weak in faith, Paul says, for their sake, please abstain from such food. You see this? So nobody, no Christian can say that this is my conscience and I will do it. No, I have a responsibility. How does it affect someone else, etc.? This is called social responsibility. Of course, social responsibility is a much wider reality than just mere one example which I'm giving you just now. So a believer cannot shut off his or her senses from perceiving the inhuman reality around and escape from the responsibility of doing whatever is possible to abolish it. So one becomes vulnerable in that sense to such demands because one believes in God who is love. It is because we believe in God who is love, then we are actually vulnerable to the demands of such a faith. We cannot shut our eyes and ears to the cries of the people. We have a social responsibility towards them. That is another type of a vulnerability. A ninth aspect of our faith vulnerability is the beatitude of the vulnerable. I put it this way, the beatitude of the vulnerable. Now, each of the gospel beatitudes, we find them in Matthew chapter 5, each of the gospel beatitudes reflects a high degree of vulnerability. You just think of any of those and you begin to practice any of those beatitudes, it puts us into a situation of vulnerability. And for this reason, they are not easily acceptable as a viable practice. Many cannot accept it because it creates a lot of vulnerability for us. It makes us vulnerable. And yet, because they are gospel, they represent a behavior that is consequence of experiencing the rain. That means one does not mind being vulnerable once he or she has experienced the kingdom. And such a one is truly blessed. So, if knowing fully well the vulnerability entailed in those 8 beatitudes, if I can still joyfully opt to be one or practice those beatitudes in my life, which means that I have experienced the kingdom and therefore I do not mind being vulnerable. So, that is the spirit of those beatitude of the vulnerable. The 10th dimension of our faith, vulnerability, is an all time taunt. An all time taunt is given in Psalm 42. Psalm 42, verse 3 says, where is thy God? Where is thy God? It is an all time taunt or an all time mockery of the tormentor. What do I mean by this? Now we can hear this taunt or mockery in its many forms in the histories of all people. People who put their trust in God, people who commit themselves to the cause of God, sometime or the other are mocked by others. Where is thy God? Now, of course, I'm referring to the innocent suffering. I'm referring to the suffering that can come on us when we are truly committed to the cause of faith, etc. People can give any number of examples, but the taunt has never lost its force. It thrives on the vulnerability of the believer who fails to experience the comforting and active presence of God in the most trying circumstances. Now, this taunt of the tormentor could act as a poisonous sting to the already battered and the bruised. Now we have the personality Job in the Old Testament successfully facing such a taunt. His wife tells him, "Curse God and die." Why do you believe in that God who does not help you in your distress? And we know his story. He successfully faces and overcomes such a situation. We have Jesus himself on the cross. If you are Son of God, come down from the cross. If you are such a great person, save yourself and save us. Similar taunt, he successfully overpowers it. So both of them did it by means of a complete self-surrender to God and not to the taunt of the tormentors. So that indeed was a perfect act of faith. Now, in this context, there emerges a question. What is the question? Is the apparent silence of God in the human suffering, I repeat, is the apparent silence of God in the human suffering, is it indicative of God's absence, or is it indicative of God's deep solidarity with the suffering humanity? Now, the crucifixion of the Son of God points towards the second of his possibilities, that is, God's apparent silence. God's apparent silence in the human suffering seems to be God's deep solidarity with the suffering rather than God's absence. The 11th dimension of faith vulnerability is given in Psalm 22. Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? These are the words placed on the lips of Jesus on the cross, taken from Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Another dimension of faith vulnerability. Now, that is the ultimate vulnerability that a human being can ever experience. What is it? A sense of being abandoned by the very foundation of our existence. Acts chapter 17 says, speaking about God, in him we live and move and have our being, meaning to say, that is the ultimate foundation of our existence. Now, that foundation itself, if that foundation itself gives up and abandons us, so you can imagine the sense of vulnerability experienced there. This is what Jesus experienced on the cross. Why have you forsaken me? Whom I trusted so much, whom I placed my faith in, and so much was promised to me. Now I experience a complete abandonment by you. Why have you done this? This is a radical vulnerability of a person who trusts in God. Our faith commitment could lead us to the point of a radical distress. We have the examples of the likes of Saint Teresa of Calcutta. You read her autobiography, who suffered long periods of spiritual desolations. To the one who lives by faith, there are no guarantees that the life of faith will make him or her feel secure all the time. There is no guarantee. I trust in God. There is no guarantee that I will feel secure all the time. No. But there is only a conviction, the trust, the hope that God's promises are reliable and that God will ultimately make them bear fruit and vindicate the faithful. We have to believe, we have to go by this promise alone. Now, faith nourished by such a hope makes the backbone of the life of a believer. And so, the apparent abandonment can cause greater hope and a stronger faith. Let me quote. This quote is a little big, but it's worth paying attention to this quote. This is a quote taken from one of the writings of Martin Luther King Jr., the black leader in U.S. Who was assassinated. He writes like this, beautiful, really inspiring, speaking about his vulnerability of faith. He says this. He says, I'll read out to you. Due to my involvement in the struggle for the freedom of my people, I have known very few quiet days in the last few years. I have been arrested 5 times and put in jails. My home has been bombed twice. A day seldom passes that my family and I are not recipients of threats of death. I have been victim of a near fatal stabbing So, in a real sense, I have been battered by the storms of persecution. Then he says, I must admit that at times I have felt that I could no longer bear such a heavy burden, and I have been tempted to retreat to a more quiet and serene life. This is a temptation, my dear brothers, is faced by all of us who face sometime or the other. We face difficult times, a temptation to give up the burden and retreat to a more quiet and serene life. This is a temptation faced by Martin Luther Jr. Now he says, but every time such a temptation appeared, something came to strengthen and sustain my determination. I have learned now that the master's burden is light precisely when we take his yoke upon us. I have lived these last few years with the conviction that unearned suffering is redemptive. Unearned suffering is redemptive. There are some who still find a cross a stumbling block, and others consider it as foolishness. But I am more convinced than ever before that it is the power of God unto social and individual salvation. And then he says, so, like the Apostle Paul, I can now humbly yet proudly say, I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. The suffering and agonizing moments, though, through which I have passed over the last few years, have also drawn me closer to God. Look at the strength of his faith in his very vulnerability to attacks. This is Martin Luther King Jr. Coming to the 12th dimension of the faith vulnerability is the ultimate concern and the ultimate demands. Faith functions at the ultimate levels of our existence. We all know this. Faith affects us in an ultimate fashion. Faith demanded from Abraham his only son. Today's reading. It demanded from Abraham, sorry, not today, yesterday's. It demanded from Abraham his only son. God's faith in humanity and God's love for us demanded from God God's only son. Now, faith demanded from Mary her only son. Faith demanded from Paul to give up all his treasured gains. He says that in Philippians 3:10. His faith in Jesus Christ demanded that he gives up all his treasured gains, which included even the father of his faith of his fathers. Even the onlys need to be relativized when faith demands it. Now, if you do not yield to the radical demands of our faith and thereby experience a death to self, we can hardly claim that we have faith. The 13th dimension of our vulnerability, the rejected stone becomes the cornerstone. I repeat, the rejected stone becomes the cornerstone. Now, just as it was necessary that the Messiah had to suffer before entering into his glory, as Luke Gospel tells us, and before coming as the judge of the world, so must a believer remain vulnerable in many ways in the very process of becoming the cornerstone. Now, we have this proverbial cornerstone, rejected cornerstone. We have this in the gospel. What is this rejected stone? The rejected stone, it becomes cornerstone. Matthew 21:42, etc. says. Now, what is this cornerstone? Cornerstone has got two functions. One meaning is cornerstone is the one in an arch in the building, which bears the entire weight of the arch. So it is a weight-bearing stone, cornerstone. But cornerstone has got another meaning. That is, in any foundation, if you see any foundation of a building, the cornerstone stands for a point from which all the other distances and angles are measured. So, in that sense, cornerstone is the perspective stone. From there, everything is measured. From there, every angle and every length and every other measurement is made. So, therefore, the cornerstone becomes the perspective stone. It becomes a standard stone. In a similar way, a life of faith in this sense turns out to be a cornerstone, a perspective stone, a beacon of light, showing the way to many who walk in darkness. Now, therefore, although faith makes us vulnerable, The same faith makes us, or same vulnerability makes us beacons of light. If we can accept that vulnerability and live through it. And the last dimension of faith vulnerability is a shift from faith doubts to faith based doubts. Faith doubts to faith based doubts. What do I mean by this? All of you know what are faith doubts. Faith doubts that of a believer point towards his or her vulnerability. A sustained and uncompromising faith commitment itself cast doubts on anything that is anti-rain. Let me explain this way. Faith doubts are the normal doubt which we get at times about our faith. Or in difficult times, is God existing at all? These are called faith doubts. And we are told, we all have done theology, we have said these are all normal things. Anybody can get a faith doubt. They are called faith doubt. But what is faith-based doubt? That is the important thing for me. Faith-based doubts are, because I am committed, because I believe in a God of love, I doubt every situation, however holy it is, however sacred it is, however dignified it may look, if that situation is bereft of love, if that situation is bereft of justice, if that situation is bereft of reconciliation, my faith causes me to doubt it. I must say, here is something wrong. My faith casts a doubt on such situations because there is a dissonance between my faith and that situation. Now, these are called faith-based doubts. So therefore, we must move from faith doubts, which are normal, to faith-based doubts. We must question everything. We must doubt everything. That really creates a dissonance to my faith commitment. And therefore, it is a great paradox. The vulnerable faith itself makes everything that is anti-kingdom vulnerable to or target to its critique. And Jacques Ellul rightly points out, faith is a terribly caustic substance, he says. Faith is a terribly caustic substance, a burning acid. It puts to the test every element of my life and of society. It spares nothing. It leads me to question my certitudes, all my moralities, beliefs, and policies. Faith forbids me to attach ultimate significance to any expression of human activity that does not really gel with faith in the God who is love. See, that is why a true faith causes doubts about any situation that does not vibrate or that goes contrary to the faith demands or demands of true love. In one sentence, true faith makes me cast doubts on anything that is not of God. Let me come to the conclusion. The disadvantage in the inverted commas of being a believer then is a paradoxical reality. The faithfulness of the believer, while being vulnerable to attacks, itself becomes the norm that proves the attacking forces are wrong. Indeed, the true witnessing to the gospel happens when the believer refuses to compromise and lives through his or her vulnerability of being a believer. Life of faith invites us precisely to renew our commitment to a life of vulnerability, to be a part of God's own vulnerability, eventually to be vindicated by the Lord Himself. Let me therefore conclude by posing the same questions again that I had posed a little while ago. What would it mean to proclaim Christ and Him crucified in our mission today? What type of a Christ do we actually represent today? What is our attitude towards powerful people? Is it a sense of admiration? Is it a sense of desperate attempt to get patronized by them? Or is it a critical respect? In what ways does our faith commitment pinch us in any way at all? And in what ways do we live in the vulnerability of our faith? Dear brothers, thank you very much for your patience, and may God bless all of us.
So thank you for the Jossi for that Brilliant presentation with absolute clarity on those, on vulnerability with regard to faith. What really, sort of touched us most was the clarity on the types of vulnerability, and especially the fundamental vulnerability of God Himself, who remains rejected and denied by the creatures that He created. And you've also thrown so many challenges in terms of those of us of faith and with faith and for faith, with the social concern, living of our beatitudes, and even being taunted by others if only we remain faithful, and ultimately abandoned, and that's going through that radical distress. Example you quoted, Mother Teresa. I'm sure there are many other saints as well. So that one word that you used, you used ultimate concern. I remembered Paul Tillich when we studied theology, who defined that faith as the ultimate concern. So, dear friends, we remain as we listen to Father José Lobo question that, namely, are we men of faith? Namely, those two words that he used, people who have doubts, or what is the other one?
Is it a faith doubt or a faith-based doubt?
Yeah, faith doubts or faith-based doubts. So I'm sure all these aspects have affected us as we listen to him. Now is the time, dear friends, to have some clarifications. As I mentioned, all the 2 days have been into planning, but I wanted something different. It's not just a mere planning, but we also need to have certain proper perspectives of faith as a secretaries of faith. So Josie has given, and it's very challenging. Therefore, let's take a moment of silence just to go through all that he has shared with us, and then ask questions. Okay, I request you to write down your questions, and then either use a chat box or raise your hands, and then we will ask questions. Yeah, whoever is ready can raise your hands, or use the chat box. I will also watch out on the chat box in case if you type any questions. Anybody, you can unmute and then ask. Yes, John Tigger.
Father Jules, you have very nicely you have covered up about the vulnerability and the faith aspect of our life. My question or my clarification is that as a Jesuit, where do we stand and where do I stand? That is one question I have, because as more and more we see our vulnerability is like on the safer side, like secure life. So that's why, like, how we should be more modified, or we should be made more stronger on this line. Like we should maybe we should be ready for our challenges. This is how we should be more strengthened in this line. That's what.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. May I know your name? John Tiga.
John Tiga.
Yeah, yes.
John Tiga.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that question. This is one of the points that you have raised in my mind for quite a long time now, and I asked this question to myself: how does it apply to me in my mission, etc. Now, my simple answer to that would be that the vulnerability that is there, that is a result of our faith, etc. It is always there. The question is, how do we face it?
Yeah.
One can say, I don't want to be vulnerable in any way. I don't want to feel insecure in any way. Therefore, let me compromise. Let me compromise and let me, forgo all that I stand for, etc., and make my faith completely shallow, simply a believing that, a set of beliefs. Let me make that. And when it comes to the challenges of my faith, let me compromise and go along with the swim along the current, so to say. That is one possibility. On the other side, we have that to take up these challenges that come because I believe in a God of love, God who is love, etc. And because of that, what are the challenges that I'm facing? Now, in order to face that and still live in vulnerability, I need to have a very deep experience of faith. I can't live at the head level and face this difficulty. So therefore, my suggestion would be, let us deepen our faith in this God who is called love, first of all. If there is a thorough rooting there, which of course, deepening of the faith also means certainly getting involved in the real issues of our people today. It is not simply, I'm not simply talking about some superficial spirituality. I'm not talking about some spirituality prayer. Prayer is certainly, but by really getting involved in the mission of Jesus, etc., in today's time, that is how we deepen our experience of this faith. Only that can actually, in a way, help us to face our vulnerability, at least to certain extent. And some of us already we have now Father Stan Swami, etc. These are the persons who have made themselves radically vulnerable. Where is the strength there? Radically vulnerable. There are many others like that. Not only Christians, even non-Christians. Now they are the inspiration for us who really live in their vulnerability and face it. All of us are not. Many of us may not be ready for it. But here is something glaring example to show us a little way. Briefly put, I would answer this way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So the only thing why I raised this question, because since this is our pastors, no? So the pastor, most of the time we feel that one parish priest goes, next parish comes. One parish priest, he faces this type of situation. Other parish priest compromises and goes. So anyway, you have rightly clarified and nicely mentioned how we should deepen our faith. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Luke.
Thanks for the super exposition. Yeah, really opened our mind to many aspects of vulnerability and faith. I just have, it's not so much a question, but a bit of a difficulty that my own personal vulnerability, and I'll give a couple of examples, could be a source of strength to the people, but it can also be a source of discouragement and a weakness in a way to them. For example, my inability, say, in the face of the torment of the tormentors, you say, the face of evil, no, and suffering. One is difficult enough to face my own vulnerability there, but my inability to explain where is God here can also make the people's faith even weaker. The gap which I have between my practice and what I preach, it's bad enough to face it myself, but it also causes the faith of others to, so that's also, something that our own vulnerability weakens the faith of others. That is something that troubles me in a way.
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a very challenging question. Certainly, I fully agree with you. But at the same time, I see another angle in it. And precisely, you see, these days, there are a lot of material coming out about leadership, etc. One of the things, and I'm also going through that, giving some sessions here and there. One of the things that struck me, and these are secular people, they're not religious priests, etc. They're writing on leadership. One of the things strikes me in all that, he says, though we think that acknowledging our weakness seems to be very frightening and may go against our credibility, etc., etc. Quite a few of them are saying that in the long run, it makes us transparent. It makes us honest, and honesty pays. Honesty pays, he says. And I think there is some truth in that, and we need to discover it if you have not discovered it. So one thing is, of course, traditionally we are considered as a holy, and people belong to other world, and therefore any scandal, any weakness, etc., is creating all this sensation. But as we go, supposing I were to acknowledge I'm a human being, and I have weakness. It's not that I'm justifying my weakness. I'm not saying I'm justifying my failures, but I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling with this. So, which means a certain amount of solidarity with other struggling people can also enhance our credibility in the long run. May not be immediately. I believe in that. Yeah. Thank you.
Joseph Fernandez from Goa province. Luke Rodriguez, who asked the previous question from Bombay. Now, Joseph Fernandez from Goa province.
Father, can you hear me, Father?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Joshi?
Yes.
Yeah. So, Father, question is, see, when suffering we talk about, there are genuine suffering and there is a fake one, false, we say, no?
Yeah.
One, like we talk about false prophet and then genuine prophet, okay? So how do we distinguish it? Many times you create your own sufferings, no? And you blame, it's like you're telling somebody else that it is coming from God, you know, God is giving me this suffering or something. So how could, what are the some possible these things means that we could distinguish some of these vulnerabilities, like, no?
Yeah, sure. It's an important distinction that you made, and certainly I fully agree with you. Sometimes suffering comes because of our own wrong choices and foolishness. So in this particular session, in this particular talk which I gave, I was focusing only on that type of a suffering which comes because of our faith commitment. I was referring to that. Now, tomorrow, if I foolishly do something and then because of that I suffer, I cannot attribute to my faith. So I need to be prudent. That is a different matter. But because of my faith commitment, let us say, I make myself vulnerable, and out of that a suffering comes. And I don't think it is so difficult to distinguish between the two. That suffering which comes because of my faith commitment and suffering comes because of my wrong choices and my own sort of foolishness. I don't think it's so difficult to distinguish between the two. And if their suffering comes because of my foolishness, etc., then I'll have to learn a lesson. Humble enough to say, let me learn from this and get up from that. That is the idea. That is the attitude. But if it is suffering because of my faith commitment, then I think it is salvific. It is redemptive, and it is strengthening, and it is also a witness to the gospel. I don't know whether I'm really making myself clear to you, Father. Is it okay for you? So once again, let me emphasize. Let us say if there is a suffering coming from because of my own foolish choices, it is a time for me to learn a lesson.
But sometimes it has been, what you call it has been impression given to others that you are committed to faith, like, no?
Yeah.
Though you are you are in the maybe making choice, so even in the faith, you are saying that you are committed to the faith, and because of the faith, you are receiving the suffering only, receiving the pain or difficulty or something like that. That's But more or less, I understood what you were saying.
Yeah.
It is,
also, I get your point. Also, sometimes we can also pretend. So a suffering which has come because of my own mistakes, we can attribute to coming from God or because of my faith, and that there is a duplicity involved there. Of course, I need to be honest there. Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Any questions?
I see one hand up there. Joseph Fernandez, is it?
Yeah, Joseph James was from Gujarat.
Fine, please. Yeah.
After that. This may not be a question as such, but I want to come back to the point which was made there earlier, the gap between what we profess and what we practice. I think this makes us, this gap, which you said that it makes us more vulnerable. At times that unless I am convinced or I am personally experienced what I am preaching, and I put before the people will watch your life. Not more than you may be a fantastic preacher, but if you cannot able to live in your community or your own brothers, you cannot bear up with them. So the people will notice. So what I want to say is that your life, which is a witness, it has a more value and more point to speak about our faith.
Yeah, sure. One point. I fully agree with you, Father. But one point I want to make here is this. The temptation is this. The temptation would be that more and more I become vulnerable to that criticism when people point out, this is not what you preach. There is a gap between your preaching and practice. When that criticism comes, there are two possibilities thereafter: to compromise and say, let me not face this criticism and let me not profess anything at all. Let me be free, so-called freedom, which is not a freedom. That is one possibility. On the other hand, yes, accept that criticism and narrow down the gap.
Yes.
That is a positive way of responding to that criticism. And
Yeah,
that's why I'm saying live through the vulnerability, than escape from the vulnerability and say, let me not profess anything at all. That is not a correct choice. That's what I was saying. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you.
For the ecstasy, Selvaraj from Andhra, kindly unmute for the ecstasy, Selvaraj. Yeah. No, you're not yet unmuted. Okay, anybody else? Okay, before he unmutes. You have to unmute, speak. No, you're not unmuted. Ecstasy, you're not unmuted. Yes, go on. Yeah. Yes, speak. Yeah.
Josie,
Yes, my Monovishate companion.
Okay. Yeah.
it's for a long time.
Yeah.
Josie.
Yes.
Now, for a long time, I have been thinking, what is exactly it? For example, Muslims believe in Allah. Hindus believe in, okay, so many gods. And you know, nowadays, this is subconscious, what you believe that you become, or what you think that you become, or what you contemplate that you become. More of oneself, your subconscious mind. You can't say to yourself what you want to achieve, that will become. So exactly what is it oneself? And people are different faiths, they have belief in different God religions.
Yeah. You are asking what is faith? You are asking that? I didn't get that word. You are asking ultimately what is faith? Are you asking? Your voice is breaking. Anybody can summarize me?
Because Hindus believe in.
Fine. Yeah. So what is your question therefore?
Nowadays, there's a modern theory. Josie,
yes.
Exactly what is faith?
Exactly what is faith? That is what I want to get at. Exactly what is faith? Fine. Okay. So if let me put it this way, that faith, as we or I or we Christians, others may have other definitions. I don't deny that. Many people have many definitions of faith. But for me, as I said in my exposition, that Paul Tillich, who said faith is being ultimately concerned. That makes a lot of sense. In the sense, in my life, is there anything that that gives me an ultimate sense of meaning? That is the first question. Ultimate, not penultimate, not temporary, not today or for time being. No, ultimately, is there anything in my life that gives me a sense of meaning? So that is my faith. Now, there is a possibility that sometimes that object of ultimate concern can be actually not ultimate. For example, somebody can say, money is my ultimate concern, but money is not really ultimate. So object of faith can be really not ultimate. That is where we have pseudo faith, false faith. So if there is an object of ultimate concern in my life, something which gives me ultimate meaning, and that object itself is ultimate, and then that is a real faith. So that is why I understand. So therefore, you may say Hindus have different faith. It is not different faith. It is different beliefs. That's why right at the start, I distinguish between the beliefs and the faith. Beliefs are the articulations of my faith. I believe in, somebody can say, I believe in my self-consciousnness. Another can be, I believe in this and that, many gods, one God. All these are beliefs. What is faith? Faith is beyond beliefs. Faith is can something give me ultimate sense of meaning? That is my faith. And there, once again, I say people can make a mistake. Something which is not really ultimate can take it as a sense of ultimate faith. And then we have a pseudo faith, or one can have a faith in something which is really ultimate in itself. That is the true faith. I don't know whether I'm sounding very philosophical for you, and this is exactly what I can put it as it is. Yeah.
Thank you for the Josie.
Nice seeing you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Josie, there's one question from Sri Lanka.
Yes.
It's on the chat book. Okay. Thank you, dear Josie, for your mind-blowing presentation. Recently, a 9-year-old girl died while playing and she is being the eldest in the family. So here I am vulnerable to console the family as parish priest by bringing the faith dimension, enlighten us from Sri Lanka.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is a very fantastic question and difficult question, and I admire that question because that question comes from a deep pastoral experience and from a pastoral field, I believe. So therefore, first of all, my great appreciation for that question. Certainly, that is the type of vulnerability that that person who asked that question has. That is, I believe in a God who loves, and here is a 9-year-old who's dead in a tragedy. How am I to console that family? And that precisely is my vulnerability as a man of faith, as a priest of faith there. I have no ready-made answer how you must start a conversation. I have no ready-made answer what exact words you must use to that family. No, I have no predetermined answer to that question. But I would certainly suggest to one who has asked that question, first and foremost, experience that vulnerability, remain there for some time. Your own weakness, your own vulnerability of being speechless, your own vulnerability of being speechless before a tragedy like this. And then perhaps out of that deep experience, some words might come, may not come. I do not know. Sometimes silence and a quiet presence to that family itself can be an assurance. Possible, I'm saying, possible, need not be also. So therefore, but before, if you skip that step, that step of facing your own vulnerability of a believing priest, if you skip that and try to use what words I can give that to that family, what consoling message I can give, I think you are missing something very precious. I would say, I'm speaking this from my own experience. Some years ago, I faced a similar situation, and I realized I was absolutely vulnerable to the attack of those persons who went through a terrible tragedy, and I had no words to say as a man of faith. And I had to allow myself to experience this deeply within my being, that very vulnerability. My silence spoke to them. And I told them I have no words of sympathy. And so in the sense of, I have no ready-made words of advice or any sympathy for you. I can simply be with you. That's it. I can simply be with you as in a certain solidarity with you. That's all I said to them. Experiencing deeply how I was standing on a quicksand. You understand what is quicksand, no? Anytime that sand can escape from your feet and you can fall down. I was experiencing that because I had no answer to that family. But I have learned something from that experience, saying that let me get hold of my own vulnerability under such circumstances and remain with them speechless. But don't escape. That's all I can say for the moment for you. If that is he still there in the office?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Samir, unmute. Yeah. Samir from Ranchi province.
Yeah, please.
Joshi, sometimes when we are with the other Christian denominations, one question we face in our conversation, they say, we are following the same God, no? They say.
Okay.
So when I was scholastic time, I had compromised many times. I said, okay, yes, but now I feel no, it is not like that.
Okay.
Our faith differs. So how we can here handle the situation?
Yeah. So okay, God is one. I suppose we all believe in that. There are no many gods. God is one. And then God, it is also true that all of us are priests, I think, and I can speak a little bit of theology here, I believe, that Vatican II document, Nostra Aetate, that very clearly affirms that the seeds of the word or the presence of God is found in all cultures and religions. It is not my idea, a personal idea. It is Vatican Church, official church's position, is that presence of God is found in all cultures and religions. There is no question about that. Now, having said that much, we can certainly affirm with anybody. So therefore, okay, having said this, the difficulty comes, what expressions you give to the experience of God in your religion. This is the point. So there is God, there is God's presence in all religions, cultures, well and good, fine. But when a human being reflects on that presence, when a human being experiences that presence and give an expression, that is where a human being can go wrong. So it is not that God is absent there, or it is not the religion is false. No, God is present there. There is some God experience in that religion. But what articulation I as a human being give to that experience, there is where I can go wrong. And I can make such religious customs and such religious rituals which are absolutely oppressive, which are violent, which are killing, which are dehumanizing, etc. So the critique is not that God is not there. No, critique is what I have made out of that God's presence and God's experience in my religion. And this critique is valid for any religion, including Christianity. Including Christianity. So therefore, when we speak with the people of other religions, we are not saying that there is no God in your religion. No, we are only saying, what have you made out of that experience that you have of God in your religion? Are there such customs, such rituals, and such laws and such beliefs which dehumanizes people of your own religion? Then we shall talk about it. Are there such customs which degrade human beings in our own religion? Let us openly acknowledge it. So that is how the dialogue is not about the presence of God. The dialogue and critique is about what we human beings have made out of that religious experience in our rituals, in our laws, and in our customs. Am I clear for you, Father? I don't know.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Josie, there's a question from Prashant D'Souza.
Yeah,
Many
please.
of us who are present here are pastors.
Yeah.
We find many of our faithful are lukewarm Christians. Faith for them is fulfilling certain spiritual activities, maybe Sunday obligations. What way we can make use of Christian spirituality, Ignatian spirituality in promoting faith?
Yeah, it's a huge question. I have no blueprint. It depends from place to place. It depends on what is the starting. I mean, you made a very sweeping statement that believers have a very shallow faith. There is a very, very sweeping statement. I think, because there are faithful people in our parishes whose faith is stronger than we priests have our own faith. So it's a very sweeping statement. I wouldn't fully agree with that statement. But giving credence to, there are quite a number of Catholics for whom the faith means simply a certain practices, a certain rituals, etc. Okay, taking off from there, etc. I have no blueprint once again for every place this is works. But I'll give you a principle to you that needs to be reflected upon. The principle is this. The principle is the starting point of any commitment is experience. This is Ignatian principle. See, before committing yourself to Christ in the second week, in the first week you have experienced his forgiving love. So commitment, and the Ignatius tells us, when you direct a retreat, if the retreatants are not ready for the second week, don't take them there. Keep them in the first week. Why? Because there has to be experience first. First is the experience. Whether it is of forgiveness, whether it is love of God, whether it is my own sinfulness, all that has to be experienced. So only when there is a strong experience, commitment can be made. Otherwise, commitment becomes shallow. So therefore, responding from this Ignatian principle to your question, in a parish, in anywhere, you find the faithful is having a shallow faith, etc. I think the problem there is the basic spiritual experience is lacking. God experience is lacking. So if at all you are introducing certain steps in that parish, in that place, to strengthen the faith of the people, don't begin from some theological principles, don't begin from some canon laws, or don't begin from what is right and wrong morals. Begin from giving the people an experience. And that differs from place to place. And of course, the God experience, which has to be given, facilitated to the people, also depends upon the life of the pastor. The life of the pastor cannot be one thing, and experience expected of the people is another thing. That is not a possibility. So therefore, the pastor takes a certain responsibility to, in a way, walk the talk, I would say, to walk the talk. Because he is the beacon of light anywhere. When I say pastor, I don't mean only those people are involved in parishes. I mean, even if those who are in schools and colleges. I mean, all those who are in the social work. All these are pastor to me. For me, pastoral ministry is not simply parish ministry. Wherever we are, whatever work we are doing, we are pastors. So therefore, our life also is a witnessing value. Having said this, what are the various ways in which we can transmit a God experience to the people, and then only commitment comes. Then only the strengthening of the faith comes. I think this is the principle I'm giving. This is not a blueprint. So perhaps you can think of some of these things. And basing on Ignatian principle, our commitment in the second week, our commitment to society comes, all that is based on the depth of our experience. If there is no depth experience, there is no commitment. Nothing can be built thereafter.
Yeah. So thank you, Josie, for that clarity. I guess all the questions are exhausted. One question from my side. In this Ignatian year, we are speaking about personal conversion, communal conversion, and institutional conversion. One thing that is disturbing me earlier also when I was a parish priest and now as a secretary of faith, as the very identity of us as priests has endowed us with enormous power. You spoke about what is my attitude towards the powerful. Is it admiration or critical? We ourselves are so powerful, so powerful. And, when we speak about personal conversion, I understand. Communal conversion, I understand. When we speak about institutional conversion, we, either in the parish or in the institutions, are so powerful. And that itself can be, can create unequal relationship. So many of us are struggling to understand this concept of conversion, especially with regard to institutional conversion, knowing that we are so powerful. Look at our principles, they're so powerful. Even parish priests, they're powerful. Either yes or no, they can say, and that has tremendous impact or repercussions on the lives of ordinary people. So could you throw some light on this aspect of conversion, especially with regard to institutional conversion?
Sure. Yeah. My own understanding of institutional conversion is slightly different. It includes what you said, certainly, but a little more than that. But I will not go into that. I will stick to the question that you have raised. The power of the priest, the very fact that you are ordained, your palms are oiled, then you receive a power, whatever. And our offices and all this. Now, I make a very important distinction here. That is, let us not be naive here. Let us not be naive. Let us be very realistic here. There are two types of powers. There are two types of powers. One power, one type of a power, if you can call it a power. I don't. Sometimes people do not agree. Don't say that is not power, but I still call it a power. One type of power comes from by a life of witness. A life of witness has its own power. It can touch the hearts of people. It can challenge the people. People can be very reverent towards you because you live, you walk your talk. That type of a power, and which is something good, something positive, something positive. If someone can see in a priest a person who lives his life, lives his profession, is a witness value, etc., and that witnessing itself transforms this person who looks at him, etc. It is a power. It's a power, and I would very much positively appreciate that type of power. Jesus exercised that power, etc. And somebody respects you because you have that type of a power, which what we call charismatic power, we call it. That is something positive, and you can use it for mission, etc., etc. So not all power is bad. So that is, but perhaps what you are referring to is that a misused power, which subjugates people. By the way, the first type of power which we spoke about frees people, liberates people. People become freer. People feel like being with you, etc., getting inspired by you. So that is something positive. The other types of power subjugates people. Now that is a power which perhaps the gospel denounces, and we need to denounce that power. That power subjugates them, binds them, makes them feel small, and reduces them to worms, etc. And I dominate over them. Now that is a destructive power, which I call it a diabolic power. And now, therefore, institutional conversion, if you're talking about institutional conversion, that power should be in a way rethought of. Now, why am I saying rethought? Because to be very practical, at times that type of a power is needed, not to destroy people, not to subjugate people, but in an institution, you need to command respect. What is called in the sociological Max Weberian term, which is called traditional power, or bureaucratic power. You need to have, somebody should obey you, otherwise the institution does not function. But the point is how to combine that power, where you can tell someone to do a thing and he does it. Combine that power along with your charismatic type of power. I'll give you a simple example. For example, a Jesuit provincial, let us say, has an enormous power. We open our conscience to him, etc. Enormous power. Now, if a provincial functions only on the basis of quoting constitutions, number of constitutions, it is said there, do it. And if he does not have a personal charisma, I think his governance is so much the poor. So therefore, that the type of a power where you can command a certain things to be done, etc., is needed, but combine well with it the other type of power which comes from your walking the talk, your being a witness. Only then these two things can be balanced. And ideal situation, this doesn't happen anytime. Ideal situation is you don't have any institutional power at all. Like Jesus, neither a prophet nor a rabbi, nothing. But there is a tremendous power in that man. That is an ideal situation. I don't know, I'm making myself.
Things are very clear. Yeah. Thank you for that clarity.
Fine.
So there is a quotation which says that gratitude makes sense of the past, brings peace for today, and creates a vision for tomorrow. But I'm really not sure whether your talk has brought peace for us today, rather, lot of disturbance and food for thought. So now I request Father Luke Rodriguez to propose a vote of thanks.
So, on behalf of the whole group, Josie, thanks so much for this wonderful session which we've had. First of all, for this clear exposition which you gave, so many dimensions of the topic, whatever, 12, 13, 14, so many dimensions of the vulnerability within faith, which was really an amazing thing and presented so beautifully. It gave us a clear insight into the topic. But I think, okay, we may forget about all those points and all that you mentioned, but we'll definitely take with us the challenges and invitations that you have given and the way in which it touched us. Because as Arun said, I think you've left us more vulnerable in some ways, because we are aware of many ways in which we can be vulnerable. Okay, it's just awareness. But it's a beautiful invitation you've given to embrace our vulnerability, to embrace it in honesty and in humility. And in that, we will find strength. And that, I think, is something really beautiful. And furthermore, the next invitation, if we take that vulnerability in honesty to the people, we can also in some way deepen their own faith. While we deepen our faith, we deepen. And that, I think, is an invitation which we will struggle with, but it lies before us as one of the ways of being a better pastor. So thanks so much for that, because that is what we will really take with us, going forward. So it's really been really touching and enriching. Thanks, Josie. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you all for this opportunity. I greatly admire your patience for such a long time sitting. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Arun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josie.
Thank you. Yes, dear friends, I'm sure, there was a little transition this evening from, let's say, somebody is, once again, I'll admit somebody is struggling to come. Okay, yeah. There's a transition from yesterday and this morning to the talk that we heard just now. They were all more of planning, trying to get clarity on a bureaucratic way or our way of functioning. And this is something to look into, ourselves, especially the inside of us. So that way, this talk has given a lot of clarity. Maybe we could reflect a lot on these lines. I'll try to get a copy of his talk. He said he will give it, and once he gives, I will share it with you. Are you all okay if Mahanand, Joe Gaikwad spends some 5 to 6 minutes in giving the summary? Is he here, Joe? Joe Gaikwad? No, he's not there. Okay, I'd asked him to give a summary. People are leaving one by one. Okay, yeah. So maybe somebody could just, make a prayer then. Shall we just make a prayer and then end it? That would be better. Okay. So tomorrow, we will be, getting Father James Hanway from Rome on collaboration. What is our relationship with him as secretaries of faith, since he is the secretary of service of faith, and among the conferences also, we do not know what's happening. So that clarity he will bring in tomorrow. So we'll gather 5 minutes before 9 o'clock, and then we have some practical issues to deal with, because he does not get up early in Rome. So he wanted a little more time to sleep. So therefore, we have given him time at 10:30, and before that, we will complete all our practical issues that we need to settle. So kindly be punctual. And I really do not understand this going in and coming in. We are only 18 now. Some people come in and then go out. So let's be punctual tomorrow. Okay. So once again, thank you very much for your patience. I know you have been listening. That panel discussion was for 2 hours. All of us remained intact, I mean, fully focused. And again, for Josh's talk, we were all there. I mean, all of them were quite inspiring today, isn't it? Begin with Joy James. He was very clear, and our speakers, they made our postulates, they brought in a lot of clarity. And of course, Josie, food for thought for us to reflect on. Okay, so let's thank God for the gift of the day and for the patience that he has given us in order to listen and imbibe, to digest. So let's say together, Hail Mary. Hail Mary.
Praise the Lord is with you.
Praise the Lord is
Blessed are you among women,
among women,
and
and
blessed
blessed
is
is
the
the
fruit
fruit
of
of
your
womb,
womb,
Jesus.
Jesus.
Holy
Holy
Mary.
Mary,
Mother
Mother
of
of God,
God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good
Sleep
night.
well.
Good night.
And
Good
stay
night. Good
fresh.
night. See you tomorrow.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Father Arul Raja.
Yes.
So I was expecting a question from a theologian to
No,
another theologian. Huh?
since it was a smooth flow, I didn't want to interrupt.
Okay, okay, okay. Yeah, you didn't want to be vulnerable or what is that? Question the vulnerability.
No.
Yeah.
It was a smooth flow. It was a smooth flow.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Thank you. So see you tomorrow.
Yeah, bye. See you.
So thank you, James. Okay.
Thank you.
Both. So you was Estek's novitiate companion.
Yeah,
Okay. Good.
right. Dan is also. Dan is
Yeah.
is also.
Okay. Thank you. So Xavier,
I don't.
yeah, how are the things so far?
So you will be sending that document,
Which, okay, the other one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Do we need to present to the whole group, or what do you think?
If there is time, we will see.
Yeah.
Whether they would like to do something. I was thinking,
Yeah.
if I send it tonight to
Okay.
Joe, and if he has to say something about it,
That's right. That's
then,
right.
present it to our group, isn't it?
Okay.
He has gone through, and
Yeah.
okay, let him give his comments. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So that would be better. Yeah. I mean, if there is a wrong or whatever, let him say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
So
Okay.
thank you, Arun.
Actually,
It went well.
all three people, Joy James and these speakers, they were, good in a way.
Very, yeah.
Maybe this Victor Edwin spoke from spontaneously. If we had put some things, it would have been a little more nicer. Okay. Otherwise,
Okay.
those three did a fantastic job. To the point, isn't it? Panelists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you will get that document for us, all the speakers.
Yeah, Josia sent.
Yeah.